hermeneutics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. Weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We're all here together. And, of course, you have seen and heard about the release of the so-called FISA memo. You might say, well, where do I go to read it? Point of View. Matter of fact, just go to where Kelly Shackelford's picture is. Right beneath it is the full text. So you'll have a chance to read the 2 pages from the White House that explains why they declassified it, and then the 4 pages of this unclassified memo. And it's 4 pages, actually about 3.5 to be perfectly accurate. It, of course, says that the Steele dossier was essential to the FBI getting the FISA warrant, and that Andrew McCabe said that there would not have been a warrant without this dossier. So that's kind of groundbreaking kind of information. Same time, you have some others that are just saying, well, this is just a Republican plot against the FBI. That's what the New York Times said in their editorial. So we'll get into all of those issues. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. A lot to cover today.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where we can look around and see what everybody's said about this, and we are going to talk about some of it, but really reading the memo is key. So I would encourage people to go to pointofview.net. It's not exactly that hard to read or understand if you know some of the background of the situation. And so, in a sense, I think there are what we expected, plus kind of new revelations in there.
There were a few people that have already been surprised. Even before we started the show, everybody said, what's the reaction? Well, first, of course, you have the president saying these people should be ashamed of themselves. You have a couple of people that said, this was more than I thought. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that if you think about it, this FISA warrant is classified, but there were many people saying, including David French, who I quoted from yesterday, saying, well, just release all this and let everybody read it themselves. But President Trump hasn't done that. So I thought, well, maybe there were a lot of other things in the warrant that maybe he just didn't want to come out. They could have been other phony documents that did not reflect well on him or Melania or a variety of other things. Well, now, again, I encourage people just read it for themselves. You don't have to take our word for it. We've got it on the website right now, pointofview.net. It says that you would not have received the FISA warrant without this dossier from Christopher Steele, which was made up, completely made up, and that it was essential to getting the FBI getting the FISA warrant. So there's not a lot of other material there. It's just that, apparently. Maybe
people knew this. I didn't know this, that Christopher Steele was an avid anti-Trump person. He's British, but he was presented as somebody who was sort of an expert at compiling these things, and what is the British spy agency?
Yeah, MI6.
Yeah, MI6 agent, and so that he would be able to investigate and give you something valuable. But it turns out, even though he's not an American, he was partisan. And he hated Trump and didn't want to see him anywhere near the White House. And I think that casts a lot of aspersions on the actual document that he prepared, which is, as you said, the main and only piece of evidence that was used to present this request before the FISA court.
And at least that's what the memo from Devin Nunes, who is the representative on the Republican side, said. Now, if I'm a Democrat, let's say Adam Schiff, what do I say? I would say it wasn't essential. So, and that's, of course, what the New York Times has said. And Kelly Shackelford, we haven't had a chance to hear from you, but you and I kind of went back and forth a little bit over this New York Times editorial. So that, and I'll kind of get into that in just a minute. But if indeed what this memo says is true, we should be really concerned about the future of America and what has been taking place there in the Justice Department, shouldn't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go back to the basics. What should it take for the FBI to investigate someone in the campaign of the opposing party. All right, that I can't think of a higher standard for we better be darn sure that if we're investigating, if we're going to actually surveil the opposing candidate's campaign, because that's like Banana Republic stuff. That's like, you're now moving into totalitarianism. It should be a high standard. Well, what happened here? The opposite party paid for information to be created, which was false, and the FBI admits that they would have never gotten the warrant without that false information that was paid for by the other party, and the court was never told that this came from the other party. I mean, this is not only does it not meet the standard, everybody well, let me say what I'm going to say, and then I'll say, well, I guess we've already started down this road, but everybody at the top of the FBI should, involved in this should be fired. Of course, Comey's already been fired, so good. We've gotten rid of one of them, but Rod Rosenstein's need to be fired. I mean, obviously McCabe has jumped out. I mean, they need to clean the whole place because this should never happen in the United States of America.
Well, again, that's a list that I mentioned yesterday of the number of people in one way or another that have either been pushed out or jumped ship. So, sometimes when some of these people leave, you wonder if when Christopher Wray was reading this memo just a few days ago to verify that he said to Andrew McCabe, it might be time for you to leave because you're
going to retire anyway. You better go now.
You are in the memo, and when the memo comes out on Friday, it's probably better that you're already gone rather than you're still sitting in your chair. So we recognize some of that. But, Penna, what about that? I mean, again, it seems to me to be a pretty high standard that if you start wiretapping or surveilling, whatever phrase you want to use, then that's kind of dangerous. And can we remember when Donald Trump was mocked when he said that Trump Towers was being wiretapped? I think it turns out he was right, wasn't he?
Yeah, today I was reading Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal, and this was, of course, written by her before this was released. But she says that the government possesses few counterintelligence tools more powerful or frightening than the ability to spy on American citizens. So they used a powerful tool based on a made-up political dossier. And then the other thing that was sort of in this memo was that they embellished it or supported it with media reports. But the media reports were coming from leaks by Christopher Steele, who wrote the dossier. So as people have been saying in the news, it's very circular.
It's very circular indeed. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to, try to be as fair as we can because, one thing Scripture talks about is when you hear from one individual, you think they're right until you hear from another. And the book of Proverbs talks about that. So let's try to, and I will try to make the case about the fact that this memo isn't exactly the smoking gun, or isn't exactly on the level with Watergate. And we'll see if you can kind of get some response to that as well. But that's kind of the big issue today. And if you look down our website, we've got a couple of things. We're going to certainly talk about the FISA memo. This will be the first time I've had a chance to hear from these two about the reaction to the State of the Union address, both from some of those individuals that are paying out bonuses, which are now being ridiculed, to even some people booing at the State of the Union address, standing up and walking out. I got a feeling they've got a few comments about that as well. So we've got a couple of articles on the State of the Union address, and then one by an individual that, of course, is at First Liberty on conscience protection. We spent a little bit of time this week talking about that because of an article that we posted earlier by David French, but thought you might like to get a revised perspective about that and maybe a little bit of a historical perspective. So we'll come back and talk about the importance of this memo, what it means for the future of the Trump administration, the Justice Department, all that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently unveiled an online tool that is supposed to help local officials see the dangers of climate change in their community. The Climate Change Adaptation Research Center provides a map that warns of the danger of climate change to each of the 8 regions of the United States. Now, these dire warnings were too much for Dr. William M. Briggs, who has been questioning many of the claims of climate change activists. In his column, he reminds us of what is really happening in these states that are supposed to be reeling from the negative effects of climate change. Yes, the climate has changed since 1980, and corn production in Michigan back then was 7.5 billion bushels. By 2015, it increased to 14 billion bushels. He then humorously notes that the EPA warns that climate change in corn-growing Michigan could exacerbate the risk of increased production. Farmers might run out of bushels if the correlation persists. The EPA also warns of the impact of climate change in Iowa. Once again, we find that there have been bumper crops of corn, soybean, and other foodstuffs. This is causing prices for food to drop. Climate change is thus bad news for those wanting higher prices. He says he can probably do this for every state, but I think you get the idea. If we're headed for a weather-induced Armageddon, the current facts don't seem to support these dire warnings. He also reminds us that back in 1936, there was an anomalous heat wave that killed over 12,000 Americans. But that was when there was a lot less carbon dioxide than we have right now. Or how about 1886, when the United States was hit by more hurricanes than any other year following it? Again, there was a lot less carbon dioxide back then. You know, the EPA is warning us of potential disasters in the future, but a look at current history and past history suggests that perhaps their predictions are too extreme. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition in studio with us today, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. If you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones. We spent a little bit of time trying to prepare you for the memo yesterday, but again, this may be kind of new information, and so we'll try to give you some background and why many people believe that it is significant, but maybe you have much to do about nothing. Maybe you think this is something that is going to bring down individuals in the Justice Department. Too early to tell, although I have my suspicions. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, one of the things that Kelly and I were kind of trading back and forth is from the New York Times. And it seems to me that, first of all, the New York Times argument, and I'll try to summarize it real quickly and then get you both of your response, is number one is that the Republicans have made a big deal about this, that whether it's Devin Nunes, the various Republicans, whether it's Sean Hannity, whether it's Sarah Carter, all the people doing research, no big deal. Number two, that the focus, which is on this individual by the name of Carter Page, is important because he, after all, had been targeted for recruitment by a Russian agent. And their argument, that's before the memo came out, is that they said it's not clear that the court in Mr. Page's case relied on the dossier at all. But even if it did, courts rarely deny warrants on grounds that an informant had some kind of bias. And so, again, the other argument is that these investigators weren't really out to fool the court. They may have left out some information, but no harm, no foul. So that's how the New York Times, in what is a very lengthy editorial with lots of snark in it, by the way, I've just left all that out, about Republicans plotting to destroy the Justice Department and the FBI, said, what about some of the arguments, which, of course, they made before they had a chance to see the memo themselves?
Well, the dossier was created. I know that it began to be created by opposition to Trump within the Republican side. But once it moved over to Hillary Clinton, the campaign, and the DNC, then that's when the Steele dossier came in to play, number one. And number two, I think that, Page, he was being looked at, but why didn't they have more information to present to the FISA court than just this dossier and some media reports? If there was some there, why didn't they have more? Why didn't they present more? Why did they have to use media reports that basically were just confirming what was in the dossier? There should have been a lot more. And, why did this even happen? It happened because the Clinton campaign and the DNC were looking for dirt on Donald Trump and looking to see whether he colluded with the Russians, when really the dossier was created, you could argue, because Christopher Steele found Russian officials and made up stories based on what they said. So who really colluded with the Russians? That's a question I think that will be asked after this starts to settle. The dust starts to settle on this.
The question I have immediately is, did the FBI people? I mean, I think they did, but I mean, this doesn't. In the first read I've had of the memo, was it purposeful, or were they just really negligent and bad at their job? I mean, to not tell the court that the information you're relying upon came from the opposing party of the campaign you're trying to wiretap. I mean, that's not something, if then not saying that is, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's criminal. It should be criminal.
The memo says that they knew about the political origins of this.
Well, that's the thing.
They knew that,
and who knew? The people,
But again, the memo could be wrong. But
right. And so if that's true, I mean, that's just outrageous. Now, if it's not true, and they're just massively negligent, and they're so bad at the FBI, and when I say FBI, I don't mean the regular people. I mean the people on the 7th floor, the political people. If they're such, horrible FBI, employees that they would allow the other party to create a silly, dossier that's all kinds of crazy stuff that's not true.
Yes.
And then that they get fooled to thinking they've got to go and to the FISA court and investigate U.S. citizens in the other campaign without knowing they're being duped, then, I mean, that's problematic too. So there's really no good, answer to this. But I just think people have to put this in context. They get so lost by the stuff like this New York Times article, which is just, it's embarrassing. They need to be sort of brought back to the fact that this is the power of our government and the FBI and the Justice Department. They are engaging in surveillance of the opposing party during a presidential campaign. I mean, I can't think of a more sensitive, protected, when it comes to having a democratic republic, this is where it breaks down right here. And if you don't have safeguards in place, your country is over. Now it's just going to be, okay, who can kill the other side?
Yeah, who has the power?
Yeah,
who's in power and who can use it against the other side? Yeah.
So, and here's what I was thinking about this, driving in the studio today. I thought, this goes back, I believe, to something we talked about on Point of View very quickly into President Obama's 8 years. I said on this radio station numerous times, I said, I am seeing something happen in the Justice Department that I've never seen. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter before whether it was a Republican or a Democrat. The lawyers in the Justice Department were going to follow the law. They were going to, their job was to enforce the law, to do the legal work that's supposed to be done. And all of a sudden, for the first time, we saw under the Obama administration, the Justice Department saying, we're not going to defend that law. And I was like, whoa, this is very dangerous. This is a really, you lose the rule of law, then we're a banana republic. If the president comes and says, well, I don't really like that law that was passed under some other president, some other Congress, so our Justice Department is not going to defend it. you lose the rule of law, you lose everything. Well, to me, this is where that leads. Right? I mean, this is now the FBI losing the concept of the rule of law and how we do things in a free society. And I mean, now that this is out, look, the Democrats, if there's something in here that's wrong, they need to correct it. I'm not hearing that in all their attacks. It's like they have all these little attacks, but they're not, oh, this is false information. So if this is true, then there needs to be serious consequences across the board. That place needs to be wiped out, the top of the FBI, and replaced with real Americans, in my opinion, because these people aren't real Americans because of what they did and how they abused the system.
You know, we have to remember that the FBI has all of this. So if there is some conclusion that's not correct in this memo, the FBI can disprove it. So we have to wait and see if they do. I doubt it. But,
But we know that two individuals, Christopher Wray and one other, have looked at the memo and said it was factually correct. So
they have.
It's that's waiting for another shoe to drop that I don't think is ever going to drop. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well,
we'll see. Kelly
was mentioning the Obama administration, and what a transformative President Obama promised to be. He said he would be transformative, and he was. And the left has a righteousness about them that they believe they are. Above the law, but just they're right. They're right for the future. They're right for the country. Their ideology is good and right. And so I think that attitudes seeped down, especially after 8 years of Obama. And, it just seeped into this. And so there was just an attitude. You can see it in the emails between Mr. Strzok and his girlfriend.
Right. Lisa Page.
Yeah, Lisa Page. They almost felt like they were in a position to protect the country from Donald Trump. And so, they did this. And so this all needs to be cleaned out with a, disinfectant. And really what's going on, and I think the reason that Donald Trump released this to the public is because in order to bring the FBI back to what it's supposed to be in the Justice Department, it's good for our country to be able to do that. We have to do that, even though it's kind of painful right now.
Yes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we have some phone calls, but let me also read just a little bit from those emails, because that is a piece that was done by our friend Robert Knight, which is called The FBI's War on Trump, which is a little different than the New York Times, the Republican plot against the FBI. So you got to believe one or the other here, because these two cannot both be true. And the difference is that he's got some of those emails that were back and forth between those lovebirds, and we learned a little bit more about how they thought about Donald Trump, why some of them thought they needed to stay in, and why they even talked about putting together a secret society. So we'll get into that. And we have lots of phone calls here, so let's, if we can, give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the FISA memo. We'll take some of your phone calls, too, right after this.
How do we know the Bible is the Word of God and not merely the words of men?
The Bible subjects itself to historical verification. It puts itself at risk of inquiry.
From the American Family Association, The God Who Speaks explores the evidence of the Bible's inspiration and authority through some of the world's most respected biblical scholars.
Just answered the questions we've had on our heart recently.
Learn more at thegodwhospeaks.org.
Once upon a time, a man sat down before a microphone and began sharing stories, news stories, personal stories, God stories. Hearts and minds were set ablaze. Organizations launched to help others. Teenagers were inspired to become lawyers, even congressmen. People like you who supported Point of View Radio the past 45 years have made that possible. You've made it happen. Yet there are more stories to be told, more hearts and minds to be shaped for the sake of our future. Visit pointofview.net and help amplify this voice with a generous gift. Pointofview.net. Click Donate Now or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And just before we take some calls, let me just clarify what we mentioned just a minute ago. Kind of apart from this memo is just some other things that are sort of background information. And as Penna mentioned just a minute ago, you have Peter Strzok. Some people refer to him as Peter Strozak, depending on which commentator you hear, but Peter Strzok, we'll call him that, was an FBI counterintelligence official who actually assisted in the investigation of the Hillary Clinton email probe and had an affair with the FBI lawyer Lisa Page. And so we have about 50,000 text messages, but nothing else. That gives you, first of all, we couldn't find thousands of those messages. How in the world did that happen? Well, apparently the argument was they eventually found them. And they said it was a misconfiguration of rollouts and provisioning and software upgrades. Somebody at the FBI really wrote that. But nevertheless, we now have them saying things like they want to put together a secret society. Some people thought maybe that's a deep state. At one point, I want to believe that there is no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy. In the unlikely event you die before you're 40, we have to do something about it. So the idea, we're going to kind of stay around, and if we have to, then we're going to make it difficult for a possible Trump administration. So,
which they have done.
And so when you look at, first of all, this memo, when you look at some of the kind of texts we have, and in a minute I want to come to Kelly because there's another issue on the unmasking of all of this so-called confidential information. It looks to me like, as this article says, the FBI's war on Donald Trump. That doesn't mean everybody in the FBI. Again, maybe more people on the 7th floor than on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th floor, but still, that's kind of what it looks like at the moment.
You know, ever since Donald Trump has been inaugurated, you've had so many attacks on him with regard to the Russians, including what was in the dossier, different things brought up, other attacks too, but I just received, in my own spirit, just the real conviction that he needed to be prayed for continually because of the attacks. And when we look at the State of the Union address, which we're going to talk about later, the accomplishments, the way that he has brought back protections for religious liberty into HHS and the Justice Department, into the government, the things that have been accomplished by this president, it's amazing to me that, the strength of the arrows and darts against him, and that he has been able to, yes, he responds to everything in tweets and other ways, but that he's been able to, in some way, keep his head down and get things done, and that he's got a staff around him that's been able to stay focused. I think it's amazing, and I do think it has a lot to do with the prayers of the American, the people across America that have been praying for him and defending him vocally.
Yeah, it's this is obviously going to be the talk for a while, and I just want to put some things together because, all right, we now have this where you've got the Democratic National Committee providing false information and an attack upon Clinton, giving that to the FBI. The FBI uses that to get a FISA warrant, meaning spying on your own citizens, based upon info from the other party. So you can now, wiretap and surveil, Donald Trump's campaign. Now, that's what this is about, right? Horrible abuse should never happen. Head should roll. Add to this what we already know, which is the information was also being unmasked at record rates. Like that never happens. It was happening, numerous times over and over again. So they weren't just surveilling, then they were unmasking the information because you're not supposed to do that. You're
not supposed to know who said it except the one that's the target, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the other, Donald Trump or anybody else who's in the campaign, supposedly that's supposed to be all masked. And it was being unmasked at massive rates. And then we have the president changing all the standards for how this information gets shared, where instead of it being kept, within, the FBI, et cetera, there was this new order. Remember, right at the end of the Obama administration, right at the time of the campaigns, and right after the campaign, so that it could attack the incoming, president, they allowed this to be shared throughout, I forget how many agencies it was now. So put that all together, okay? The DNC, basically, the other party comes up with false information. They go in and get an illegal FISA warrant to spy on the other campaign. They then unmask everything, which is against the law, and then they share it throughout the government, and knowing that it's going to leak because it's now going to just all kinds of different people that it normally would never go to. You add that all together, that's just, there's a lot of there's a lot of explaining to do, right?
A lot of explaining to do. Yeah.
This is going to be a real issue.
Yeah. Well, let's take some phone calls because some of you have been waiting a while, and I'd love to get your comments. You can agree or disagree, and we're still trying to figure it all out ourselves. So let's go to the state of Texas, KBJS. Elaine, you have the opportunity to start us off today.
Yes, I'm so glad this memo finally came out because I've been concerned about this for a long time. Back in October, I heard Louis Gohmert on C-SPAN talk for an hour, and he had connected all the dots, and I guess we're just now finding out about it, that he talked about how Rosenstein was in on it from the beginning. He and Mueller, they had to get this special counsel so that they could cover all the stuff they did under Uranium One and Hillary Clinton, and so I really hope Rosenstein and Mueller get their due because I think they were at the bottom of not all of it, but a lot of it. And then I was kind of curious as to Christopher Wray on Sunday. He said there was nothing in this report that couldn't come out to the public. And then after Rosenstein pays a visit to him, he says, oh, yeah, this is going to be terrible. We really shouldn't release this.
Yes. These are the same people that didn't seem to be that bothered about the release of the Pentagon Papers. Matter of fact, there's a new movie out just about that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you had the WikiLeaks, both under the Bush administration, never seemed to be too concerned about commuting the sentence of Bradley Manning, who, by the way, now is going to be at Chelsea, I guess, and running for office. And, now all of a sudden we're real concerned about releasing one of these memos, which is only 3.5 pages and certainly doesn't look like anything that needed to have been classified in the first place.
Well, that's it. Wray argued with the president that this could compromise national security. And you look at this and you think, well, first of all, most of the information in the dossier about Trump and his people was already leaked anyway, and they did it on purpose because they wanted people to find out. And as Kelly said, information was all over the place. But to put it in a memo and give it the context that Devin Nunes did, that was too dangerous to national security, according to the FBI director. So that was interesting, and it was just a bit disingenuous. But, now you can see they're going to be under scrutiny there at the FBI.
Well, and again, as we point out, Devin Nunes is, of course, the chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And, of course, the ranking member, who's a Democrat, is Adam Schiff. So we'll see what he has to say. But the issue, again, if I were trying to argue against this, the only way I could argue is that maybe the dossier wasn't essential. But when you have individuals saying that it was essential and the only reason you got the FISA warrant was because of it, I'm kind of thinking, I don't know how they're going to respond, but we'll see what they say when that particular next memo or other talking point comes out. Let's head to New Hampshire, WSEW. And Vinny, what would you add to our conversation today?
Yes, Kirby, I appreciate all you guys do. I just can't help but wonder, in my mind, what would happen if the tables were reversed? What if we turned back time 10 years and the Republican National Committee had put together a dossier on Barack Obama, and all of these things happened on the other side? What would be the response in the media? What would be the response in D.C.?
Front page news.
And how many heads would roll, and how quickly that would happen? I just really want people to be held accountable. I want to see people go to jail.
Kelly, any comments?
Yeah, and the thing that I would really like to see, I just don't know if it exists anymore, but I would like to see, both parties insist that this is horrible, that this shouldn't happen. If they had any sense, they would know they don't want this to ever happen because, well, now that Trump, what if he filled the FBI 7th floor with his people and they could just start doing this to the Democratic Party? I wouldn't put it past him if he was like, okay, if this is how we're going to play, then we'll play that game. They should. I mean, I just don't understand their approach at all. This sort of, hide the ball approach. They ought to understand how dangerous this is, and they ought to come out as Americans and say, we don't want the FBI doing these types of things. This is wrong. But maybe I'm wishing for too much.
I don't know. We had Howard Baker, who was a Republican, come out and finally say, Mr. Nixon, we need to change that. We need Democratic Howard Baker right now, don't we?
That's right.
We'll be right back.
Off a dramatic 7-day hearing last month, a Michigan judge delivered a 175-year prison sentence to former USA Gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar for sexual abuse of patients. Nassar, a physician at Michigan State University, was also team doctor for the school's gymnastics club. Testimonies from 156 of Nassar's victims revealed that for some of the gymnasts, the abuse began when they were children and continued for years. How could this have gone on so long? It's now apparent that people and institutions that should have protected these young women didn't. Complaints to coaches reach as far back as 1997. A parent confronted Nassar himself in 98. He managed to convince this parent his actions were, medical. In the ensuing years, coaches, university officials, gymnastics officials, and even some of the girls and some parents bought this argument. I never thought a doctor would have misused his power so much, said gold medalist Allie Raceman at Nassar's sentencing. In 2014, a student persisted in her complaint. A Title IX investigation ensued, but inexplicably, Nassar was cleared. USA Gymnastics finally fired Nassar in 2015. He had worked for the organization since 1986 and served as its national medical coordinator since 96. Still, no charges. In August 2016, the Indianapolis Star launched an investigation. A victim filed a police report, and Michigan State fired Nassar the next month. One survivor, Rachel Denhollander, said in her testimony, "This is what it looks like when the adults in authority do not respond appropriately to disclosures of sexual assault." Sports writer Jason Gay summarized, "This is what happens when institutions choose self-preservation over transparency, quiet settlement over uncomfortable truth." At the U.S. Olympic Committee, there are resignations and hopefully investigations. But for now, victims of sexual abuse or their parents if they are minors should go beyond their institutions and directly to law enforcement. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And again, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We are talking today about the FISA memo, and let's head out to Texas. KCTA and Susan, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello. I was just thinking about what Mr. Shackelford said about becoming a banana republic. And I was thinking the reason that we're not is because there is no department or person anywhere in the central government that is not subject to oversight. The FBI doesn't just sort of stand alone secretly and do whatever it wants. There is congressional oversight to those departments. And what kind of bothers me is when the senators were questioning Comey, and just it seemed like they were just sort of sitting there waiting for him to tell them what they were supposed to do and what they decide. And one time he even told them, no, they can't have something because of the security nature of it. Well, that's what they have oversight over, is this national security in the FBI. That is a balance of powers that Congress does for us. And, well, for me, that it is my Congress, and I have oversight over everybody. And, of course, they're all responsible to the Constitution. But there is no separate secret department that doesn't have oversight from Congress.
Well, that's what we learned in school, isn't it? Just not always turning out that way. I saw the press conference today where Paul Ryan was there because you have the retreat right now of the Republicans. And by again, we just are so sorry about that train accident. But one of them was saying, well, why is this memo coming out? And Paul Ryan was trying to just do Constitution 101. Congress does have the oversight over the FBI, and we want to make sure that the way in which FISA warrants are obtained follows the Constitution. And you got a lot of people in the audience looking around like, really? He's going to use a constitutional argument for why we're doing what we're doing? But that's a very important point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the first point is that the FBI is underneath the president. And if you have a president that, if the FBI starts doing things they shouldn't, the president should stop. But if you have a renegade president, either one that's, countenancing this or is just clueless that it's going on, then that's how you have the Congress. This is why we have separation of powers. And it goes back really to the founders understanding our sinful nature and that we all need to be watched by each other. Mm-hmm. That's why you have the separation of powers, and that's why that's so important to our system of government. Now, what's really sad, though, is when the Congress has authority, but half of the Congress is so interested in their politics that they would let the FBI begin to get out of control. So Adam Schiff, here's what I'm finding when I read stuff like this New York Times article, or when I see Adam Schiff recently, I'm embarrassed for them. To me, it's just embarrassing. It's so transparent what they're doing. And you just want to go, why are you even there? I mean, if you have no integrity and you're so into your politics that you don't care what happens to the FBI, then please leave office, because that's not what we need representatives. And I wish the Democrats would throw him out. If the guy's in charge of the Intelligence Committee along with the other party, and you see the FBI running renegade and using, a dossier paid by one of the parties to get a FISA warrant to engage in surveillance of the other side, you should say, whoa, this has got to stop, not try to come up with cute excuses of why the public shouldn't see it and all this. I mean, I hope somebody shows, some character, that they actually care about the Constitution, that they actually don't want to see us, develop into some sort of KGB country where whatever party is in control tells the FBI to go do their dirty work. Anybody with any sense doesn't want that kind of country, but I'm amazed at the partisanship that is going on instead of what should be real unity on. And again, you can disagree on a lot of stuff, but on stuff like this, where you've got a party, the DNC, whether it's the RNC or the DNC, paying for something, the FBI using that to then spy on the other side and hiding information from the court and then unmasking their personal information against the law and then releasing it throughout the government so that it's leaked to the news. I mean, come on. I mean, everybody can see through this. I think this is, if they don't wake up, I think the country is going to turn on them. And I think this is one of those things that goes across party lines.
Most people that we all know have been waiting for this memo to be made public. We couldn't wait to read it. We couldn't wait to see what's in there. But when you really look at the average American, most of them didn't even know. If you asked them what this was about, they wouldn't know.
They would not know.
They listen, they read the major media and watch it. They watch it more than anything, sound bites. And so they are not educated. First of all, they don't really care about the Constitution. They don't even know what the Constitution says with regard to these things. So you have a public that's basically, I mean, we've heard the term low information, and they're easily manipulated, and the media is in that. I mean, not all media, because we've got a very diverse media now, but the powerful media is in their camp. The educational system is of the left. Hollywood, with the exception of people that you've had on this show this week and others who are making, better entertainment and art, but you have so many of the institutions controlled by the left. You don't have to go very deep. You just have to say things about this president, and this big hunk of the electorate will believe it. And that's why President Trump has the approval rating, although it's risen after the State of the Union address that he has. And so, even if that we're following the Constitution, we on the right, we're trying to protect it, most of the country doesn't appreciate that or care. So the people that do care have to be louder. They have to have their homework done, and they have to begin to, control these institutions and do the best they can to do that and educate their friends and their peers. So, I mean, that's why we're going as far as we are off the reservation. But it's up to us, and it's up to the people listening to Point of View to hold the line and make sure that they stay informed.
Well, let's, if we can, take at least one more phone call, and we'll keep some of the others for the second hour. In Georgia, WLPE. We, again, want to educate you. Penna's all about that, and we certainly are here at Point of View. Kurt, what would you add to our conversation today?
Well, I just wanted to point out again about the fact that, did anybody forget about Watergate? I mean, wasn't the act of the plumbers to break into the DNC headquarters to spy on them? What's the difference, for heaven's sakes? And so, therefore, if we were upset back then in 1972, why are we not upset this time?
Well, again, as some have said, if the tables were turned, or as I saw some people on the screen here said, if the shoe was on the other foot, as Kelly did just a minute ago, that is the case. We're looking forward to maybe seeing some people saying, okay, this is of concern. And as you watch the news or as you read newspapers, if you find a Democrat that's a leader, especially, that says, okay, this is something that we need to address because obviously we've got a problem, that will be good. Instead, what I'm seeing is some of the Democratic leaders saying that Devin Nunes should be removed from the committee, that this memo is dangerous, and that we're in a full-scale war against the FBI. And so you'll see what happens, and I'm looking forward to that individual that stands up there and says, wait a minute, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, we just do not want to head down this road. Kelly?
Yeah, what a joke. I mean, the New York Times headline is a joke, and it's embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. I mean, a war against the FBI because you come out with a memo that everybody says is true. Again, if they want to say, okay, this isn't true, okay, that's another story. But they're not saying that. And even the New York Times story doesn't say that. It just tries to play around it and pretend like it's not there or it doesn't matter.
Attack the people, not the issue. And we've seen that before in courtrooms. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute. And if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151. Or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We did talk about the FISA memo. Got one more call related to that, but I did want to move into some of the other articles, because we have some about how the Democrats have responded to the State of the Union address, and a couple of other ideas, and then maybe even a little bit on conscience protection. And a little bit later, I do want Kelly Shackelford to talk about some of the cases that they're dealing with. I've heard that there are a whole bunch of First Liberty cases that may end up on the Supreme Court. But let me take a leftover phone call from last hour, so we'll go back to the state of Georgia on the Good News Network. Randall, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thanks for having me on. I think it was very interesting. During this whole process, he's been just persecuted, you know. And as believers and bodies of believers, I think it's odd that we can't believe that somebody can repent and have change or are moving on in God. And I think also that it's very interesting that he's been able to find so many successes in helping the economy and the stock market and the bonuses that we're giving out. And I believe it's funny. It's interesting at the same time, because nobody wants to really recognize it. You know, you get the news, they play it down, and they always, you know, just kind of throw off on it. And then it's almost like a reverse discrimination. You know, they're still comparing his administration to the Obama administration. And then there are so many things about the Obama administration, even as an African American, that I didn't agree with, but I still prayed for the president, you know. And I believe that that's not going on as it should. A lot of people aren't praying for our president and our leader, and a lot of this stuff is coming out of that.
Yep. Well, first of all, I think as Penna said, again, let me come back to you, Penna, a lot of people should be, and a fair number of people are. Let's give credit where credit is due. I felt like this last election, there were probably more people praying than ever before, but we do need to pray for our president, whether you agree with him or not. And it does seem kind of ironic that he had to use the State of the Union address, the third longest. This week I'm going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas this weekend, and I'm going to go to the Clinton Library. The man that holds the record for the longest State of the Union addresses.
And the second longest, right?
The
longest, too.
Yeah. But even in the midst of that, he had to spend all the time talking about the successes that sometimes the mainstream press won't talk about.
Yes, and it's interesting to see now the Rasmussen daily tracking poll is showing that Trump's approval rating has risen 6 points from last Monday to today because people actually, I think it was like news to some people who are watching what had actually been accomplished. The other thing about the speech was interesting because he didn't take credit himself as much as giving credit to people. I just thought the speech, it diffused the credit.
He used we and
out to the country
more than I. You know, that was, matter of fact, I think they said used I 29 times. I can find some old speeches under the previous administration where that was sometimes in 2 or 3 paragraphs of the previous administration. So he's learned a lesson, but 2.4 million new jobs, 200,000 new jobs in manufacturing. Wage stagnation is over and wages are rising. The stock market has gained $8 trillion in value. Can I go on and on? How about 250 different American companies that are providing bonuses, which, by the way, the Democrats say are insignificant or crumbs. Mm-hmm. What about that?
$1,000.
Not smart.
Not smart at all.
Politically, not a smart thing to say.
$1,000 is a lot of money.
Right?
I think to most Americans, $1,000 is a lot of money. Yeah. And this is the thing. I just wonder, as Penna said, you see these polls beginning to change. Look, Donald Trump has said a lot of things to cause his own unpopularity, no matter what he does. But I think the media has been so biased and unfair that I think a lot of people that don't pay a lot of attention are just hearing a lot of the noise. And so the fact that this was the first State of the Union and they actually got to kind of see him directly, I think the same thing might begin to happen there that we're going to see happen with regard to the tax reform bill. Remember, the tax reform bill, when it was polled, was, really at 43% approval rating or 42%. And since it's, and all this crazy stuff in the press and Democrats saying things like, well, they only getting $1,000. What's that? That's like crumbs. Not to the average American. And I think in the same way, they're now getting their paychecks starting in February. It'll start showing up in people's paychecks.
Yes.
There'll be more. And I just think long term, this sort of strategy of the other side and of the media is not going to work. And so I think it's not surprising at all that now the tax reform bill is, I think, it went from 42 to 58% approval, and it's going to keep going because people are going to look at their checks and they're going to go, wow, there's $200 more in my check, or, whatever the amounts are.
Right.
And so I just think this sort of lying approach doesn't work eventually because the truth comes out. And when people see the truth, they're like, hey, I thought this guy was supposed to be a demon with horns, and he was actually pretty nice in the State of the Union. And there are a lot of good things that happen for our country. And then especially when they watch the Democrats refuse to stand up and clap, for, the family whose kids were murdered by the MS-13 gang, and when they wouldn't stand up for the lowest black unemployment in the history of the country and all. I mean, I just think it begins to make them rethink and relook at things and go, I know Trump's got his issues, but, maybe I should, give him a break and hope that he does well as president.
This article that was in the Associated Press is a good example as well, because it just shows again that there's one example. This individual is working, and he said, I got an extra $200 in my paycheck last week, which will help offset the $300 increase in my cost of health insurance. So, you're seeing some of these kinds of articles surfacing. But, what about some of the issues related to Donald Trump? I think Ellen wants to address that. So let's go to Kentucky, WYGE. Ellen, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, hello. Hey, the stock market bubble is over, so the stock market is dropping today. And furthermore, what I was going to say is you guys need to read the last paragraph in the memo. And you also need to listen to John McCain's message that was put out today. And read it on the air, because it's very good and hits right on the head. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for taking me and listening.
Sure,
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Let's work on, I don't have the, maybe you can help us here with that last paragraph, because, again, we want everybody to read it, and it goes on for about 3.5 pages, so that is certainly the case.
Yeah. It's about fellow Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos. There's no evidence of any cooperation or conspiracy between Page and Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos' information triggered the opening of an FBI counterintelligence investigation by FBI agent Peter Strzok. Strzok was reassigned to FBI Human Resources. That happened recently. His paramour, Lisa Page, no relation to Carter Page, where they both demonstrated a clear bias against Trump and in favor of Clinton, whom Strzok already investigated. I don't know why this changes anything. The Strzok-Lisa Page texts also reflect extensive discussions about the investigation, orchestrating leaks to the media, and include a meeting with Deputy Director McCabe to discuss an insurance policy. These are all things that you mentioned.
Yeah, we've all known.
Yeah, we've known these.
And I don't think the bubble in the stock market is over. I think that's a little premature.
Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently unveiled an online tool that is supposed to help local officials see the dangers of climate change in their community. The Climate Change Adaptation Research Center provides a map that warns of the danger of climate change to each of the 8 regions of the United States. Now, these dire warnings were too much for Dr. William M. Briggs, who has been questioning many of the claims of climate change activists. In his column, he reminds us of what is really happening in these states that are supposed to be reeling from the negative effects of climate change. Yes, the climate has changed since 1980, and corn production in Michigan back then was 7.5 billion bushels. By 2015, it increased to 14 billion bushels. He then humorously notes that the EPA warns that climate change in corn-growing Michigan could exacerbate the risk of increased production. Farmers might run out of bushels if the correlation persists. The EPA also warns of the impact of climate change in Iowa. Once again, we find that there have been bumper crops of corn, soybean, and other foodstuffs. This is causing prices for food to drop. Climate change is thus bad news for those wanting higher prices. He says he can probably do this for every state, but I think you get the idea. If we're headed for a weather-induced Armageddon, the current facts don't seem to support these dire warnings. He also reminds us that back in 1936, there was an anomalous heat wave that killed over 12,000 Americans. But that was when there was a lot less carbon dioxide than we have right now. Or how about 1886, when the United States was hit by more hurricanes than any other year following it? Again, there was a lot less carbon dioxide back then. You know, the EPA is warning us of potential disasters in the future, but a look at current history and past history suggests that perhaps their predictions are too extreme. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, one of the things we've done is, of course, posted the information from the White House and the unclassified memo by Devin Nunes. And, of course, we'll see what kind of responses are out there. One of the things Ellen talked about just a minute ago is the response from John McCain, and he has said that really attacking the FBI only serves Vladimir Putin, and actually attacks on the FBI and the Justice Department serves no American interests. So that's at least kind of what he has said in that regard. But one of the things I wanted to get to, because we have not had a chance to hear from the two of you, is the State of the Union address. Now, I'll be honest, there have always been times, even yesterday when I was talking to an individual that has worked with the Reagan Library, even during Ronald Reagan's tenure, where Democrats would sit on their hands and Republicans would stand. And, of course, there was the theater of bringing in various guests, and Ronald Reagan started that. There have been a few times when we've had some shouts from the audience. One time when Barack Obama was speaking, you heard one member of Congress said, "You lie." But this seemed a little different, and that is we had booing at one point. We had at least one or two members of Congress, I'm thinking of Luis Gutierrez in particular, make a point of standing up and walking out. And so this is, kind of a question that I have about, can we not come together, especially back to when Kelly said this a minute ago, Penna. It's one thing to say, okay, I don't agree with the removal of the individual mandate out of Obamacare, but can't we all agree that when we are talking about some of the economic successes, 2.5 million new jobs, or a rise in the stock market, or the lowest unemployment rate in the history of keeping records for African Americans, isn't that the time to stand up and applaud, even if you're a Democrat?
I would think so, and I would think it would actually be good politically to do it. To say that this is an attack on the FBI, I mean, really what this is trying to bring the FBI back to what it's supposed to be. And instead, to say that all this truth that came out in the memo is an attack, it's actually an attempt to, discredit it, I think. But that's not fair. And as far as the way the Democrats acted, it was embarrassing. I mean, they looked so nice and all in their black, but that was part of it, too. And, when you can't stand up and applaud something that benefits your constituency, like the jobs reports for the entire nation, and especially for Black and Hispanic Americans, I mean, it's the best job situation right now. That it's better than it's ever been in this country. The unemployment rate has never been this low, and so among those constituencies, they couldn't applaud that. It's stupid.
A rising tide floats all boats. That was a phrase that was said before. John F. Kennedy used it again, and others have. And so that's part of it. And Kelly, I've recognized that we have a lot of polarization right now and partisanship, and you go to Washington, D.C. on a pretty regular basis. But I guess maybe I'm just too naive to think that can't we work together on some things that are going to move forward the United States of America?
Yeah, it used to be that way. It used to be that there's things that we could all agree upon. But unfortunately, I mean, I think the State of the Union was somewhat of a picture for how bad they've gotten. Now, I don't know if this is just the Democrats or whether whenever the Democrats get the presidency, it will be this way for the Republicans. But it's really gotten to an extreme version now. What the Democrats are doing, even if they agree with the Republicans, they still won't, cooperate. I don't think I've seen that before. And so that's sort of the ultimate sort of partisanship. So when the president said things that everybody in the country should be in favor of, they refused to clap. I've seen the same type of thing in the Senate. Barack Obama would have nominated somebody for the federal bench. Because of the senators and the president, President Trump, will nominate the same person as a way to be, kind and hey, this is who under Obama you guys were proposing. And the Democrats will use the stall tactic to
stalled some of the Obama appointees that Trump. That one just is a head scratcher.
To me, it's there. You're the point now. I don't care. Even if I agree with you, I'm going to obstruct.
Yeah.
Then, I think at that point you really have lost the ability of people to have any statesmanship, to have any concern of the country first. Again, is this just Democrats, or whenever the Republicans are on the outside next, will they get this extreme? They haven't before. And this is the first time really any party has been this extreme, what the Democrats are doing now. And again, most people think it's because of their Trump derangement syndrome. They hate Trump so much. They're so shocked still that Hillary didn't win that they're doing this. But it really is bad for the country. Fight over the issues you want to fight on. But if you agree, don't act like you did in the State of the Union, and don't just try to obstruct just for the reason of obstructing, even when you agree.
One of the examples we used on Wednesday, Nick Pitts talked about it, and we've posted it here before, is the story about Senator Joe Manchin. Now, he's from West Virginia. Mm-hmm. He's really probably one of the last kind of bipartisan Democrats because he is from West Virginia. He's worked with the Republicans on everything from gun ownership to abortion. And there was a video showing him standing up to start to applaud, and then he looks around and realizes no Democrat, and he sits right back down. And my line was, if you think peer pressure only exists in high school, you've not been to the United States Senate. So here's a man that was applauding one of the obvious applause lines that you would think everybody, Republican or Democrat, would applaud. But as soon as he's about halfway up, he realizes no other Democrat, and he sits right back down.
The camera was right on him.
And that just, I think, was such a powerful visual illustration of what Kelly was talking about, that sometimes you can't even cooperate with the other side. Otherwise, you'll pay a price in your own party.
It's pretty sad.
Well, we're going to take some phone calls in just a minute, but again, I just thought it would be worth mentioning that, and perhaps you have some thoughts about this. Is it possible to find common ground? Are there some issues that we can work on? The president did talk about everything from immigration. Obviously, that's a little bit controversial. Infrastructure, that can't be that controversial. And you even had a few Democrats saying, okay, if he's really serious about prison reform and criminal justice reform, maybe we can work with him on that, which I thought was really necessary and important as well.
You know, he had his immigration section of the speech was a major part of it. And it occurred to me because he's offering as the number one plank in it citizenship after 10 or 12 years of meeting certain requirements. And, of course, a lot of his base are criticizing the president for that. But the Democrats have not been very positive on this four-plank immigration plan that, the president said it's a compromise, and it truly is. It's not like the president is not going to take a lot of flack for it. I don't think they will. I don't think the Democrats will get citizenship for the Dreamers because they're so recalcitrant about the other planks of this, the wall, for instance, and some of the visa lottery program and other things.
Like a deal breaker.
So yeah, it's like they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're not going to get to help the people. They want these people as voters down the road. They want to grow the rolls of the people who are going to support Democrats. And they're not going to get that because of the way they're acting.
Yeah. Let's take another phone call real quickly. We'll go to California, KYCC. Leslie, what would you like to share with our audience here today?
Yes, hi. I'd just like to say that the reason why it would be unrealistic to expect the Democratic Party to give credit where credit is due and all the wonderful things that President Trump has accomplished is because the Democrats have a totally different agenda for America. They want America to become a socialist country, and under Obama, America came so close to becoming just that.
Well, and again, not all Democrats. I mean, again, I'll give you Joe Manchin as the exception rather than the rule, but Bernie Sanders was talking about a single-payer plan, which is basically kind of a socialist plan, and I've noticed that almost all of the potential rivals to Donald Trump in the presidential, whether it's Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, all the way down the line, almost all of them have signed on to that as well. So when people say it's socialist, that sounds like hyperbole, but it's pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah, and this, again, this is the kind of thing that the Democratic Party, even just real recently, has shifted dramatically to the left. And this is what I think is so unusual. I mean, a lot of the things they're attacking the president on immigration are things that they advocated for just recently.
Well said, yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. It's really odd what's going on. I really think this is going to hurt them, and I don't think they realize it yet. And so I think this demonization and this sort of the way they acted in the State of the Union and this going to the extremes because they feel like if you're not really extreme, then the people will attack you within the party right now. It's like there's no diversity within their party.
We'll come back and take one or two more phone calls, but we want to get into conscience protection. There have been some things written in the New York Times and other places about that, so Kelly can help us, and we'll talk about that right after this.
How do we know the Bible is the Word of God and not merely the words of men?
The Bible subjects itself to historical verification. It puts itself at risk of inquiry.
From the American Family Association, The God Who Speaks explores the evidence of the Bible's inspiration and authority through some of the world's most respected biblical scholars.
Just answer the questions we've had on our heart recently.
Learn more at thegodwhospeaks.org.
Once upon a time, a man sat down before a microphone and began sharing stories. News stories, personal stories, God stories. Hearts and minds were set ablaze. Organizations launched to help others. Teenagers were inspired to become lawyers, even congressmen. People like you who supported Point of View Radio the past 45 years have made that possible. You've made it happen. Yet there are more stories to be told, more hearts and minds to be shaped for the sake of our future. Visit pointofview.net and help amplify this voice with a generous gift. Pointofview.net. Click Donate Now or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We're going to talk about this idea of conscience protections and also want to talk about some of these really important cases that First Liberty will have before the Supreme Court. But I have two leftover calls from last hour, half hour, so let me just take those real quickly and give you a chance to express your point of view. We'll go to Missouri this time, KTTK. And Debbie, you have the floor.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
Okay, so someone already took the words out of my mouth. They're not Democrat anymore.
You know, if they were, then they would be bipartisan. Second of all, this memo, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, personally.
Some people wonder if it is.
Bottom.
Yes.
Actually, I think it's the bottom of the iceberg, and I think when they get to the tip of the iceberg, you'll see a lot more names. Like, Comey, Clinton, Obama. And it's a travesty. It's an absolute travesty for any political party to go to the extremes illegally to try to get what they want. And heads should roll, and striped suits should follow. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, I wonder how. I wonder if they will get another investigation going on, or
some people have talked about that.
Will we have more congressional, House and Senate investigations, or all of the above, like they've done against Trump?
I think the one the shoe I'm really waiting for to drop now is the what's his first name?
Oh, the Inspector General.
Yeah, the Inspector General. Because he's been actually, really doing a heavy investigation of the FBI for a good long while, and supposedly he's about ready, and there's no telling what he has, and it's just going to add to what's already out there.
So, again, we'll cover all of that. If you are just joining us, let me just mention that we have posted the FISA memo. You can read it for yourself. It's about 3.5 pages, and, of course, we also have included the 2-page from the legal office of the White House, which, again, is important just to explain why they decided to declassify that. That's by Donald McGahn under the White House stationery, so you can see that as well. Let's go to Ohio this time. Sam, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, hello. How are you guys doing?
Very good. Go ahead, Sam.
I just wanted to make a comment about what you were saying before about the State of the Union and the incivilities shown, and I just wanted to say that I don't think people who support Donald Trump really have the moral right to complain about incivilities shown due to his many uncivil comments in the past and due to what used to be called Obama derangement syndrome. There were polls taken when Obama was president that shown that a significant percentage of Republicans literally thought that he was the Antichrist. And
I have some questions about that, but go ahead.
People were open. No, that was like a real poll. A significant percentage of Republicans
Antichrist.
thought he might.
Don't buy that, but go on. You get your next point.
And also, they, Republicans were saying that they wanted to make sure that Obama, was a failure and so forth. So I just think, and due to many of Trump's comments about certain individuals, about saying that Ted Cruz's father was, might have been implicated in the JFK assassination, and just many of the very uncivilized things he said about, Mexicans and LGBT people and so forth. I just think it's really rich for him to be criticizing or for...
Yeah, and I think he probably doesn't have the stature, but, we've been critical of the lack of civility for years, going all the way back to even during the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, the Obama administration. I'd like to see if we could get some level of decorum someday, but we certainly don't have it.
The logic of what we just said is backwards. If you disagree with Trump and want to criticize him because of his incivility, which is a basic point that many people make, then you don't show your non-hypocrisy by acting uncivilly when he says something and does something that is not uncivil. I mean, if incivility is wrong, then it's wrong. And it doesn't mean that, well, since he's not civil, then I don't have to be civil. Well, then evidently you're wrong too. I mean, either it's wrong or it's not. So, we used to have the ability where if somebody was uncivil, then you somewhat shame them by acting civilly back. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've essentially lost now. But, I mean, let's take when Barack Obama, as we were doing the comparison, gave his State of the Union speeches. Republicans did not stand for everything he said because they disagreed with him. But I can't remember them when he said things that they agreed with, refusing to stand. This is what's new in this State of the Union, and it's really somewhat bizarre. And I do think is connected to this sort of, Trump derangement syndrome. Really what it is like there's sort of this permission now to be mean and uncivil because Trump is so bad. It's the ends justify the means is what it is. He's so bad that I don't have to act right. And that's, again, that whole logic doesn't work. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's wrong for you to do it. It's wrong for him to do it. And I have no problem with saying he's uncivil, he's done this, he's done that. But then don't act the same way and then feel like you're morally superior because you're now engaging in the same thing that you're criticizing and you're being hypocritical by doing so.
I mean, for me, I just threw the civility expectation away. It wasn't there when I started watching. I just think it's dumb on the part of the Democrats not to stand up and applaud things that have been accomplished in the country that actually benefit their constituency.
You both have been involved in campaigns. This could get to be a really difficult election this time because if indeed some of that behavior illustrates the kind of ads and commercials, there's going to be a real battle during 2018 in order off your elections. And usually the person in power, the party in power, loses about 25 seats. We've seen that under George W. Bush.
In the House,
in the House, usually. And you see that under George W. Bush and Barack Obama. That would be the expectation, which might mean the Democrats could, again, control the House of Representatives. But in light of some of this and in light of this memo, do you think it has any impact at all or might have any impact on the 2008 election? Since, as Penna points out, not everybody's a high information voter right now.
Yeah, I think the question is how much of the basic, again, people are not going to pay it. They're not going to be like point of view listeners that actually are well aware. They're keeping up with his information. I mean, the average person is not. So what leaks through and I think the truth eventually does leak through. Mm-hmm. I think the attempts to sort of, say, let's distract people, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, that eventually doesn't work. I mean, and kind of the basics leak out. I think what is going to leak out from this story when it's over, I don't know. I think it'll have some impact. I think the much greater impact is going to be the economy. I think the tax cut bill, which I think will have a very positive impact on the economy. And I don't mean right now people are having their paychecks for the first time show $200 more or so on average. They'll like that. Okay. But I think even greater things are going to happen because of like repatriating all the money, the trillions of dollars, the reinvestment into our economy with all these major businesses. I don't care if they're liberal or conservative. That's going to create more jobs, more activity. The economy is probably going to be really positive. And I think that is something that everybody understands. And it's kind of like if things are good, you're not looking to really kind of throw everybody, overboard. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be much more powerful in what impact it has on the normal out of, power party and the energy that they bring than probably this will. But I could be wrong. I mean, this thing could kind of lead to something else. But I think people's pocketbook is a little stronger than something that is wrong that doesn't directly at that time impact them.
Well, and again, if indeed you have kind of a blowing and going economy, and go all the way back to the 1980s, that tended to help Ronald Reagan. One of the things I said when we were talking with our guest yesterday is Ronald Reagan one time said, I knew when Reaganomics was working because my critics no longer called it Reaganomics. Now they're starting to talk about Trumponomics. If it really starts going, then that won't be a term of derision. That will be a positive term, and that could make a real difference in the election. So let's take a break. When we come back, I do want to talk briefly about this issue of conscience, and the reason for that is Kelly Shackelford knows the individual that will be heading up the Conscience and Religious Freedom Division. But the New York Times, got a quote from them one more time, is convinced that this division is not necessary because, after all, evangelicals are overreacting. Except David French points out you've got two cases before the Supreme Court right now that have to do with the issue of conscience protection. And so we'll talk about that. The ACLU and Lambda Legal think it's a dangerous idea, and I want to get Kelly's comments on that as well. So we'll talk about that right after this.
off a dramatic 7-day hearing last month, a Michigan judge delivered a 175-year prison sentence to former USA Gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar for sexual abuse of patients. Nassar, a physician at Michigan State University, was also team doctor for the school's gymnastics club. Testimonies from 156 of Nassar's victims revealed that for some of the gymnasts, the abuse began when they were children and continued for years. How could this have gone on so long? It's now apparent that people and institutions that should have protected these young women didn't. Complaints to coaches reach as far back as 1997. A parent confronted Nassar himself in 98. He managed to convince this parent his actions were medical. In the ensuing years, coaches, university officials, gymnastics officials, and even some of the girls and some parents bought this argument. I never thought a doctor would have misused his power so much, said gold medalist Allie Raceman at Nassar's sentencing. In 2014, a student persisted in her complaint. A Title IX investigation ensued, but inexplicably, Nassar was cleared. USA Gymnastics finally fired Nassar in 2015. He had worked for the organization since 1986 and served as its national medical coordinator since 96. Still, no charges. In August 2016, the Indianapolis Star launched an investigation. A victim filed a police report, and Michigan State fired Nassar the next month. One survivor, Rachel Denhollander, said in her testimony, "This is what it looks like when the adults in authority do not respond appropriately to disclosures of sexual assault." Sports writer Jason Gay summarized, "This is what happens when institutions choose self-preservation over transparency, quiet settlement over uncomfortable truth." At the U.S. Olympic Committee, there are resignations and hopefully investigations. But for now, victims of sexual abuse or their parents if they are minors should go beyond their institutions and directly to law enforcement. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. One of the articles, as a matter of fact, the fourth article, written by Michael Berry at First Liberty, and it reminds us of the history of conscience protection. We'll get to that in just a minute. But, Kelly, you know the individual that will be heading up this Conscience and Religious Freedom Division of the Department of Health and Human Services. We've had a little bit of a conversation about it this week, if for no other reason than the New York Times was just convinced that this is not necessary. And the argument it made is, first of all, that evangelicals are overreacting. And David French, who we posted his article a couple of days ago, said, well, overreacting when you have two cases before the Supreme Court. One, Jack Phillips, Masterpiece Bakery. That's a religious protection issue and a conscience issue. The other has to do with a pregnancy resource center, whether or not it would have to publicize abortion. We could add all the other cases you at First Liberty had to deal with in terms of Hobby Lobby and all the issues of birth control mandates and those kinds of things. So I don't think that's an overreaction. If anything, I think it's a corrective, because weren't most of these protections passed by both Republican and Democratic presidents, and yet we had the previous administration unilaterally decide to ignore those, right?
Right. I mean, essentially you're talking about 25 laws that are already on the books, and all this division is doing is making sure that the law is actually followed. I mean, what a crazy thing to do, huh? You know, I mean, again, the New York Times is, kind of, well, not kind of, I mean, they're just massively losing any credibility. This is basic. Yeah, I do. The guy heading it worked at First Liberty, Justin Butterfield. He's a Harvard grad, very bright. And he'll do a wonderful job of making sure that in healthcare, that we actually follow the laws protecting religious freedom and conscience. The reason for this, in part, is we just finished like 100 different lawsuits with HHS, like trying to force nuns to provide birth control to their fellow nuns. And I mean, this is crazy stuff that did not follow these laws. And so they're just trying to make sure going forward that nobody, whether you're a person of faith or even a person of conscience without faith, you shouldn't be forced to violate your faith and conscience in your health care. And that should be kind of basic.
When Obamacare was written and passed, there was a lot in it. I remember talking about this as it was being voted on, that gave the Secretary of Health and Human Services leeway to write rules to implement Obamacare, in all kinds of areas. And we saw how that worked out under Obama. Most of it was squelched religious liberty, forced abortion, was very detrimental to the Hyde Amendment, which is passed every year, and all kinds of bills that provide help for people that are poor. And so, we needed a reaction to that under Trump. I mean, Donald Trump was elected by people who, most of them are pro-life. Most of them are don't want to see doctors forced to perform transgender surgeries, or the military forced to provide it, or whatever. So, it was actually a logical reaction. It was a strong reaction to have a department that's going to be paying attention to these things and protecting people's conscience and religious liberty. And, of course, the New York Times won't allow for fairness. They just think the left agenda is the correct one.
The commentary by John Stonestreet at Breakpoint was a good one, because he said, lambda legal, that was kind of a head scratcher. Why would they be against it? Because they were concerned that this would affect them in one way or another. So they went through the rules that were put forth and found that the word abortion was mentioned 155 times. The word suicide, like physician-assisted suicide, was mentioned 29 times. But then went back, how many times does the word LGBT or transgender appear? The answer to that would be 0, because this is about abortion, and it's about various kinds of contraception and about physician-assisted suicide. And so what I would say is, I recognize that abortion is legal, but that doesn't mean that healthcare workers should be forced to perform an abortion, even though it's legal. I recognize in some states physician-assisted suicide is legal in some states, but it shouldn't force an individual to end the life of another individual. And yet what you see right now in the New York Times and the ACLU is this is the Bible versus the Hippocratic Oath. I think we can make religious accommodations, can't we?
We have since the beginning of our country. We've got numerous laws that allow people to be exempt from things that violate their conscience and faith. Why? Because that's why we formed our country. I mean, hello. We formed our country because people were being told to violate their faith. Yeah, hey, you don't belong to the Church of England. They came here so that they could have freedom. And the idea that, I just get so tired of these people that they think their issue is so important that they should shove it down everybody else's throat. No, that's not the way we work in America. Argue, win the debate, but when you win the debate, if you win the debate, it doesn't mean you force people to, affirmatively participate in whatever it is you're wanting them to do. I mean, talk about slavery. And the idea that the government can force you to perform an abortion, can force you you put whatever it is that you have a conscience violation to. It's really short-sighted thinking to think, I'm going to give the government this power and they'll never use it against me. Very short-sighted. Well, right now, my buddies are in control, so I'll just give them this power. And it's like, guess what? That spear is going to be turned on you. So, again, it's one of those things that really everybody should agree on, but they just, in this case, sort of the abortion distortion, right? It's like this is the ultimate God, abortion, so we can't allow people that won't perform abortions. We got to take their doctor's licenses away, or maybe they can't be nurses anymore. No, that's not what we do in the country. You know what? There's probably other people who would do this. And there's no reason to force somebody to violate their faith. That's just intolerance And it's religious discrimination, and our laws protect against it.
Let me just mention that, of course, we have Penna Dexter's commentary, and you can actually make sure that you can hear that and listen to it. And, of course, we encourage you to sign up so you'll receive it tomorrow in your inbox. But, Kelly, we also have a link to First Liberty. Matter of fact, this article that we have here gives a little bit of the history of conscience protections by one of your colleagues, Michael Berry. But in the short time we have left, talk about the fact that you have so many potential cases going before the Supreme Court. So this is a real prayer target for all of our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. The cases, real quickly, there's 6 of them on their way to the Supreme Court. One is Rowan County, North Carolina. That's about whether county commissioners are allowed to start their own county commissioner meeting with a prayer offered by one of the commissioners. ACLU is the one who filed a lawsuit in that one. Jackson County, Michigan, same issue. Those county commissioners were opening their time with prayer, which, by the way, goes back to the founding of our country, and there's been numerous cases on, but unfortunately, it looks like this is going to have to go to the Supreme Court. The Bladensburg Veterans Memorial case, which is a cross that's been up for almost 100 years, honoring 49 who died in World War I, that 2 Obama-appointed judges just declared unconstitutional and would jeopardize all the large standing crosses in Arlington Cemetery, since that's in the same district. That's going to be on its way to the Supreme Court here pretty soon. The Sauce case, which, I don't have time to go through the details, but just you're going to find this hard to believe, but is a woman who was told by police that she was not allowed to pray in her own home, and we're literally arguing about whether that is a violation of the First Amendment. Livington's Christian School, which is a case regarding whether a city can ban the ability of a Christian school to exist anywhere in the city limits.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Coach Joe Kennedy case, the coach who was fired for giving a 15-second silent prayer on his knee after the football game. All 6 of those are on their way to the Supreme Court, and I would encourage people to be in prayer and go to firstliberty.org and sign up if they want to get the regular alerts about when a decision is made by the court on these cases.
We have a link to that, and I encourage you to do so when you go to the website, pointofview.net. And if you can support this ministry, we'd appreciate it, too. I hope you'll have a great weekend. We'll be watching the Super Bowl. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly